Morning, everyone. This is Michael Steinberg, also known as NorCal Storm Chasing, and I have a different video today that I'm going to be providing. As many know and as many follow, they follow all my storm chasing that I do. So when I was, up in the Sierra chasing blizzards, storms down here in the valley or down back east in Oklahoma, or wildfires, and my channel really got a lot more views from my park fire videos, the helmet cam videos. Today's going to be different. As many others know, on my other social platforms, I'm currently an undergraduate at Chico State studying physical and environmental geography. And one of the things that I'm really focused on is what's called pyrogeography. And that is basically everything about fire. Indigenous fire, cultural fire, prescribed fire, wildfire, how that affects humans and how humans affect that. And today, I'm at the ignition point of the park fire. So this is where the park fire started, and this is really going to be the only time that you're going to see this. And this is going to be the only time where I'm going to talk about it. I think we, as people, we talk too much about how fires start. One of the questions I always get is, what do you think about how this fire started? Or can you believe how this fire started? And quite honestly, I really couldn't care. Personally, I couldn't care. This county, Butte County, which we live in, I'm at Upper Bidwell Park right now. We've had significant wildfire for many decades, dating, pre-campfire. Everyone talks about campfire, but a lot of people forget about the 2008 Humboldt fire. And how significant that was for the community. And a lot of quite a few of these fires were lightning started. These weren't man-made. This was, a guy pushing a burning car down a ravine. The North Complex fire in 2020, lightning started, wind picked up. That's what took out Berry Creek and unfortunately killed, 15, 16 people. 2008 Humboldt fire, that's a lightning complex. We live in an ecosystem here in Northern California that's dependent upon fire. This area, especially, Upper Bidwell Park, in this area here, this is all fire adapted ecosystems. This is an area where historically, the tribes that were in this area, the Machupta, they'd be burning this almost every year, especially as we head up to the grasslands, and more grass type ecosystems. It's an area that burns really should burn every 1 to 5 years, but we haven't been doing that. So one of the big things about why this fire took off is, the park fire took off, is fuel. The past couple of winters, we've had very, very wet seasons, a lot of rain, a lot of mountain snow. All that fuel built up, and it doesn't take much in Northern California during the summer to have all that rain with all that fuel buildup, become devastating. And past couple years, that's happened. A lot of people remember, hey, it's been a lot more dry with climate change. We're gonna have more droughts. With climate change, we're gonna have more extremes, and that includes very wet seasons. So winter 2022, 2023, that was one of our wettest winters in California history, and that happened in the 21st century. So, what are my thoughts? This fire, it would have happened. This is, as I said before, this is an area that just always burns, and it should burn. A lot of these plants, a lot of these flowers, these trees, they need fire. As you can see here, as I point up, those pines right up there, those gray pines, those foothill pines, that indicates that this is a fire adapted ecosystem. This needs fire. And as we journey up further up, kind of in the initial footprint of this fire, I'll show you some of these areas, a lot of these areas, and kind of how we can learn from this fire, how we can move on from this fire and basically become more resilient. I think that's one of the things about fire that a lot of people don't understand, is that we easily can become resilient to massive wildfires. All it takes really is, you know, time and effort, and an understanding that what we've been doing for the past 100 years with fire suppression isn't cutting it. It really isn't. So as we're walking along, this is Lower Trail, I believe. We're at Alligator Hole. So again, this is the initial footprint. And as you can see, you know, we're in a grass oak woodland, which is a very, very common ecosystem here in Northern California, and all California. As you can see, I mean, yeah, of course, everything's blackened. But this coming winter, we're gonna have some beautiful flowers in this area. As I point down here, as you can see, all that grass that's coming in, that's all native. That's deer grass. Further up the burn, as many people have seen from my other photos on my other social platforms, there's a lot that's coming in. You know, there's a lot of native plants that are already resprouting, rejuvenating. A lot of people don't understand that, you know, we can have green plants in the middle of August after a burn. It's just, it's this ecosystem that we live, as I've said before, it needs fire. And this is an area where fire, low intensity fire, which the park fire was when it began, was really good. And this was a very, you know, beneficial burn. You know, unfortunately it did burn a little hot in certain areas, so a lot of these trees, some of them did get top killed, but a lot of these oaks, they are resprouting, and a lot of these oaks have mechanisms for when there is fire for rejuvenation. One of these things that they do is they sprout at the branches, kind of in areas that didn't really burn. So as we walk along the trail, I'll kind of point it out to you guys. So this oak over here, you can easily see how much green is already popping out. You know, these are fresh shoots. And you can see a lot of the other area around, you know, of course, was burned, but you know, this is an area that, again, it needs fire, and the park fire really, you know, provided that. As we move on, you know, again, there's, you know, a lot more evidence of, you know, higher intensity fire, and that's okay. You know, a lot of these areas, again, hadn't seen fire for many years, and as you can see here, this whole stand, you know, it's pretty much torched off. But there's plenty that's already growing. You know, and again, this is probably an area that was really thick, and when the fire came moving up through the grass over there, you know, just selectively took this out. You know, there's a concept in Native American culture, you know, in our area, that I learned from one of my professors at Chico State, and it's something called elte. And essentially elte is basically a sixth sense, you know, for your environment. You know, you see things in the environment that you know just aren't right. You know, it's basically kind of a gut feeling. If you see something that is sick, you need to take care of it. On that thought, I mean, once again here, just passing through, this is an evidence of, you know, higher intensity fire with the white ash that you see. I mean, a lot of this area here, again, very good fire effects, in all honesty. Really nice to see. But again, you're going to have areas where it didn't burn a little hot. And again, that could just be the fire, you know, selectively taking it out. So back to elte. You know, this is a concept that I really didn't understand, and of course I had no idea about, you know, again, because, you know, I'm not indigenous, and it was passed down to me through a class earlier this year. Elte is something that it's something that many people don't even realize they have. You know, when you're outside and you see a forest and there's a bunch of, you know, dead pines that you see, and you know that forest is sick, then that's elte, you know. As we keep moving, again, right here, look at the screen. You know, a lot of people see this ground and be like, oh man, this is, you know, devastating. But again, I'm seeing more deer grass. If you just look up, those are very green shoots. You can hear a bunch of birds, and you know, I can hear an acorn woodpecker in the distance. They rely on this stuff. You know, they rely on fire as well. You can hear an acorn woodpecker going at it with that oak tree over there. As we keep moving, you know, this grassland right here, this grass oak woodland, I mean, this is what the fire burned over here. No different. And this is really good biochar. And when it rains again later on this spring, we're gonna have some amazing wildflowers all in this area here, and further up into the canyon too, where the fire burned. So one of the things that is kind of an issue with, you know, fire suppression and conservation as a whole is this idea that humans really shouldn't have a say in how the landscape is. And that is false. Native Americans in these lands in California, they burned an average of 4 to 12 million acres a year, which is for a lot of people mind-boggling. You know, how could we burn that much, you know, per year? And it's because of this, these ecosystems. You know, if we think about what our worst fire season was in California history, we think back to 2020, and a little over 4 million acres burned, and that number is the minimum threshold for what indigenous peoples did before, you know, pre-fire suppression. When I heard this fact in the study from an academic you know, institution, that when it came out, it was mind-boggling, you know, because growing up, and you know, even a couple years ago, I thought most fire was bad and we should be preventing it. Fire suppression has really created many of our problems across the western United States, whether it be grasslands like this that I'm standing in right now, or further up the road, you know, past Forest Ranch, standing in a pine forest. All these areas need some sort of fire. Most of it, you know, good fire. You know, what is good fire? Good fire is low intensity, you know, fire that's on the ground, that's taking out understory grasses, basically clearing up the land. And, you know, indigenous cultures, you know, indigenous people, they did this for, you know, to create stronger plants for basket weaving, medicinal purposes. So plants that had medicinal properties, they would burn off whatever they needed to so that could come back. But also because they knew that they needed to steward the land. You know, if they wanted to go hunting up in the mountains, you want the deer to run freely. You know, and a lot of these forests that we have in Northern California and California as a whole, it's hard, it's thick. Could you imagine a deer trying to run through, you know, basically miles upon miles of thickets, shrubs, understory that shouldn't be there, or really packed, you know, timber forests? It's incredible. You know, it's incredible that we as people here have unfortunately kind of let this happen. This was going to happen whether or not climate change had a part. And, you know, again, if we want to go into politics side of things, prescribed fire isn't a right or left issue. It's something that everyone agrees on, that this is a solution. This is something that needs to happen. I had a great conversation when the park fire was happening, and it was a person that I know. You know, they're conservative. They really don't believe in climate change. You know, that's a whole other topic. But they said that, and this is their words, when the white man came, that's when things, you know, fell apart. And that's what happened. You know, fire suppression really has hampered the health of our forests. They need fire. And as I talked about conservation as a whole, You know, this whole thing with conservation projects, it means that there's an end date. But the thing is that a lot of these ecosystems, they can't afford an end date. You know, they shouldn't have an end date, and they can't. You know, so if we talk about, you know, like a 5-year or a 10-year conservation project, you know, yeah, we'll put, you know, fire in this ecosystem every couple of years. You know, maybe this is one unit over here, and then this is another unit, and you kind of just go back and forth. After that 10 years, what happens? It's all going to come back. Fuels are going to get thick. Non-native species are going to come back in, take over the native species, and then we're going to have another park fire, another fire. And this all comes down to, again, policy. You know, the whole thing about the Wilderness Act, which is something that I've kind of really looked into the past, you know, 4 or 5 months. It's wrong. You know, these are wild, quote unquote, wild and scenic areas in which humans shouldn't be touching. You know, humans shouldn't be up there. It's entirely false. Further north, there's an area called the Ishi Wilderness, and pretty much the entirety of it burned in the park fire. And the Ishi Wilderness is an area that, again, needs fire. It needs prescribed fire. But it hasn't. And fire history up there in the Ishi is very minimal. If you look at fire history maps over the last couple hundred years, or the last 100 years, there's really nothing. There's nothing up there. So there's a lot of fuel that built up. And if we haven't been stewarding it, so if we haven't been, you know, actively managing with fire and doing what we need to do, is what happens. And that's where the fire really accelerated, the park fire, when it just took off through that landscape. And that's how basically this fire grew 300,000 acres in 3 days. Over 300,000 acres. That's a lot. And a big reason why is, you know, it was burning through a lot of these ecosystems here. A lot of grass, oak, woodland in the foothills that transitioned into heavier timber forests, you know, the further up you go. As we continue kind of walking up through the footprint, you can see kind of how it lays out. You know, again, as what I was talking about, you know, further down the trail, this area was just prone to burn. I'll point kind of further towards the west, so I'll be kind of towards Monkey Face up there. Again, look how thick it is. This grass should be gone. There's a lot of star thistle around here too, and they're pretty annoying. You can see some kind of dead shrubs over there. That's more than likely that area that we saw kind of further back, where there's kind of higher fire intensity, probably burned a lot of this. And, you know, if we're thinking about elte, you know, an area that's sick in this ecosystem, that's one area that needs to go. Right below this oak right here too, there's a little more, and all this grass. You know, this idea about fire suppression and preventing fire, you know, unfortunately it's going to be here to stay. Cal Fire, they keep you know, increasing their aircraft fleet. You know, they have the new C-130s that they're putting out right now. That didn't work. That didn't work for the park fire. As many know, it pretty much started right underneath these high tension power lines. When a fire is underneath this kind of critical infrastructure, you can't use aircraft. You know, aircraft cannot drop across these power lines. So there goes air attack. Now that fire is established, what you did here, the park fire, and it just kept on running with the wind. If you can't do that, what's next? Nothing. You know, you're not going to risk the lives of other firefighters on engines and dozers, hand crews, to try and cut this off, because this fire was just moving too fast. it was moving with the wind upslope through critically dry fuels, you know, a lot of grass, a lot of oak. And then when it got into Cohasset, it transitioned into heavier fuels. So a lot of manzanita, other brush types, and then also a lot of gray pines. So again, what we talked about earlier, you know, that's a ecosystem that needs to burn. And every time I pretty much drove up to Cohasset on various occasions, whether it be, you know, going up, hanging out, or if I was going up there, you know, a couple years back for the Butte County Trex event, Prescribed Fire Exchange, I was photographing it. Every time I would drive on Cohasset Road, I'd always think to myself, man, if a fire ever came through here, this would be devastating. And unfortunately it was. Again, it's many people saw through my videos when I was down there, you know, that first night. It was intense. Hearing, you know, the stories, and, you know, being there at the time, hearing it on my radio that I had, on my, you know, on my chest. Hundreds of people that were trapped up in Cohasset that had to go north and then take like a logging road back out to Highway 32 and then down. It's chilling. You know, it's an area that I really always was concerned about, and many others were. And unfortunately, we just didn't have the time and the resources to take care of it. And again, there's not much we can do in just 1 year. You know, this is a long time coming for that community, you know, with fire. So how do we move on? How do we find solutions to kind of both steward our land in a way that will make it more healthy, more sustainable, less receptive to mega fires? And how do we keep ourselves safe? So the number one thing really in terms of keeping yourself safe, your families, your homes, is defensible space. This is something that a lot of people talk about. You know, CAL FIRE, they do a great job trying to promote it. More grassroots, you know, organizations like the Butte PBA, the Prescribed Burn Association, and others. You know, defensible space is a lifesaver. And, you know, with that, especially in Cohasset, comes, you know, being an active steward on your land. And, you know, doing your own prescribed burning, clearing away vegetation. I think one of the most amazing stories that came out from all this devastation with the park fire is the story of Maple Ranch up in Cohasset. This is a property that I was on a couple years ago for the Butte Trex event that I talked about, the Prescribed Fire Exchange. The property owner there was really good at managing their land. They pretty much did burns every year up there. It was a very healthy ecosystem that he had on his property with the forest. And when the fire came through that first, you know, the first couple days, it was intense. It was burning up through those drainages that are very, you know, very steep, like all the drainages, you know, in this area, in the Southern Cascades and Northern Sierras. Right when the fire hit his property line, it changed. It was a very intense crown fire that was moving up slope. Right when it hit, you know, his property, it became manageable. It was a nice low intensity ground fire. This allowed, you know, units, firefighters with CAL FIRE to not only make a stand and protect his home, his property, but establish an anchor point in order to save more homes, and which that happened. Firefighters were able to establish an anchor point up there, and basically that's like a safe zone in order to start working from there. So they would establish an anchor point and then start moving hose line off that anchor point to, you know, or hand line, whatever, you know, whatever line that they decide to make. And that's what saved a big chunk of Cohasset. There's really, if you look at a fire map of the park fire and you kind of zoom in towards, you know, Cohasset, there's this island of green. And it was all thanks to one property owner. And so you can start thinking, well, if this is just one person that did this, you know, one owner who was proactive in their land stewardship, what can we do if it's a whole community, if it's a whole neighborhood? That's something that is easily attainable. All it is really is to be able to educate community members, provide those resources, and provide an understanding that if we band together and work together and work on stewarding our lands, and, you know, especially with defensible space, because that's the easiest thing a property owner can do, is just clearing, you know, the first 5 to 15, 20 feet of vegetation off from their homes, and then working out from there. That's it. That's how you build resiliency. Even with climate change, because we don't know what might happen. There's, you know, we know that, again, extremes are going to get more extreme. We're going to have a lot more intense drought, and then a lot more intense winters. Fire is really the natural disaster that humans can have a say in. We can't stop tornadoes. We can't stop hurricanes. We can't stop earthquakes from happening or volcanoes. Wildfire is really the only natural disaster in which we have a direct say in whether or not it'll be devastating, or whether or not we can manage it. Because think about it. With this fire here, you know, in this ecosystem that needs it, if all of Cohasset and all these areas that are in these foothills were fire adapted communities in which every single homeowner was properly stewarding their land and had defensible space, in all honesty, we wouldn't really even need to worry so much about suppressing this. Yeah, there are areas in which we would need to save, you know, and yeah, we can actively manage this fire, but we wouldn't need the plethora of aircraft that we had on this fire. We wouldn't need, you know, thousands of wildland firefighters on this fire. They could be resting at home from an assignment instead of having to drive from one fire to another at 3 a.m., you know, 2 weeks away from their families. And again, this is something that really shouldn't be restricted to people. You know, it shouldn't be restricted to people that have a yellow shirt on and a hard hat. Native Americans, they didn't have Nomex. They didn't have wildland helmets. They didn't have brush pants. They didn't have red cards. They had family, they had friends, they had each other, and they had knowledge. And they had knowledge that if we take care of this land will take care of us. And that is where our focus really needs to move. We need to, as a whole, go back to nature. We need to understand that without it, all things will come undone. You know, there's a dream that I have, and this is something that I got from my professor who I talked about, you know, when I talked about elte. I dream that one day firefighters, you know, no matter what their qualifications are, whether they're a hot shot, you know, type 2 crew, pan crew, it doesn't matter, will be able to lead hundreds of citizens, thousands, in communities all along the Sierra foothills, in the valley, you know, in areas that have a lot of grassland, and lead them in prescribed fire. Lead them in, you know, say a burn on Earth Day. You know, a lot of people talk about, oh, what can I do for on Earth Day? Maybe that year, if the conditions align, maybe a whole community can go out and do a prescribed burn to be able to, A, keep their community safe, you know, for the near term, and B, reconnect to a side of, you know, something that we haven't really thought about. You know, humans and fire are always connected, you know, dating back millions of years, and we've lost that side. So as I kind of wrap things up, you know, with this video, I want everyone to really think about, you know, how can we change? How can we make our community stronger, healthier, more resilient to fire? Because no matter what other suppression tactics we might have, more aircraft, more dozers, industrial firefighting, you know, that's pretty much what it is now at this point. What other solutions are there that actually work? And if we're thinking, you know, cost effective wise, because the government really does love to think about, okay, what's the cheaper way of doing things? It's getting out there. All you need is, you know, on a really good day, all someone might need is a lighter and a pitchfork. And this is something that, you know, I've done a couple times with my professor, is doing fire in an indigenous way. We don't really use drip torches, you know, we don't use those kinds of things. All he did on his property in the past spring was just take a lighter, light off a little bit thing of pine litter, and then with his McLeod tool, he just grabbed some other pine litter and just started dragging fire. And to be able to see that and, you know, really not have any sort of worry about this thing escaping, because we had direct say in what this fire would do and how it would be managed. It kind of really opened my eyes of kind of what we can do as a whole, as a community. So, you know, this is something that, again, think about it and think about how you can be a better land steward, you know, in a community that you love. Because this community that I'm standing in right now, and unfortunately the community that I had to help keep safe with the park fire, I hope that this is a learning moment, and it definitely was a learning moment for me. So I'll have some links in the description to kind of further your knowledge, and then also resources that I talked about earlier. So I'll have those links down there. And with that, I'll see you at the next snowstorm.